our global channel, and 80% of that is produced by my producer. We have over 20 Cambodian shows, and a few of our producers are here today, so thank you for joining the conversation with me today. And speaking of this space, I want to acknowledge Councilor Krystal Representative Ron Long. I miss anyone? Oh my goodness, yes. Oh, yes. Mr. Dominic Lay, who's a really good friend of Satya Moore over here. And the chair.
It's no secret to anyone in this room that Lowell is a special community. It's one of the early places in the Commonwealth to recognize that our diversity is indeed our power and our strength. And anyone who grew up here will tell you that that's thanks in large part to the tremendous contributions of our Cambodian, Vietnamese, and Laotian communities. Asian American leaders have made history here, and we will and that is extended now across the Merrimack Valley, across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but it started here. And you're just looking out at so many of the faces that have catapulted that progress. It shows that we still have a lot of history yet to be written. It hasn't been all sunshine and roses, and particularly in these last couple of years. The rise in anti-Asian discrimination, hate, and violence has been alarming. And to many, it has even created a sense that the unbelievable progress that's been made in communities like ours is being undone. But Lowell is resilient. We have never been more united. And we have just in the folks in this room, but certainly Representatives Mom and Howard, our Mayor Chow, Councilor Noon, they make it clearer than ever that through their leadership, that our best days are in front of us, and that we are going to embark on those days together. I am grateful for their efforts on a whole host of things, on making the community that we call home better, but also in rooting out systemic barriers to success for Asian Americans of all backgrounds. And I'm proud to elevate those efforts to the highest levels of our federal government. So whether in stronger hate crimes legislation or targeting longstanding inequities, we are in this together, and I am so grateful to have all of you as partners as we continue that work in the months and years ahead. So, thank you.
I'm here in Lowell. This is my first time in Lowell, Massachusetts, and so, and as Albert mentioned, we had a very busy day yesterday. I was in Boston. We spent several hours in Chinatown hearing from community leaders, from elected officials, and then I went over to Harvard to speak to one of Christine's seminars. And so it's really important for me as we're traveling that we're able to connect with community leaders all across the country. You all are really the backbone of our communities doing the work. And I know in particular over the past nearly 2.5 years, I mean, it has been such a tremendous and a very turbulent time for our communities as we have dealt with not only the disproportionate impacts of the health and economic disparities of COVID-19, but also the really alarming rise in anti-Asian hate and violence we have seen that is still continuing to impact our communities to this day. And so I want you all to know that the White House Initiative on Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders is not new. It's actually existed for over 2 decades. It was first created under the Clinton administration in 1999, but it was reinvigorated and expanded just last year in May by President Biden through the signing of Executive Order 14031 to advance equity, justice, and opportunity for Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. And so through our initiative, we are laser focused on really ensuring that we are doing as much as we can to address the significant and long-standing inequities that have long impacted our communities. And that is more important now than ever as we continue to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, and also to ensure that we can really promote the safety, inclusion, and belonging of Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander communities all across the United States. A gunman targeted 3 separate Asian-owned businesses and killed 8 people, including 6 women of Asian descent. And that moment, I know for so many of us, was triggering, not only because we had already at that point witnessed so many instances of violence targeting our communities, but also because it was really the first time that we started to see national attention being paid to our community in ways we had never seen before. And so as a result of that, I think so many of our communities have really felt that we are at this historic inflection point where we have the visibility, we also have the political will to ensure that there are resources being allocated to our communities, that there is visibility for our populations. And so that is really, again, something that the president and the vice president are deeply committed to as well. Within his first week in office, President Biden issued a memorandum to condemn and combat xenophobia, racism, and violence targeting Asian American communities, knowing that already we had seen such a significant rise in anti-Asian hate even before the Atlanta spa murders that happened last March. And then in May of last year, to be able to address the spike in hate crimes we have seen over the course of the pandemic, targeting Asian American communities, but also more broadly, this bill will also impact other communities that have been impacted by hate and discrimination. So it has been, it was a really tremendous effort to get that across the finish line. We are currently in the administration working to implement that law in the terms of tracking hate crimes, making sure that resources are translated into several Asian American languages, and also making sure that we have the robust support that we need to really raise awareness and visibility about hate crimes that have occurred throughout the pandemic. So we are earnestly working on that. The Department of Justice has been working very closely with Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander stakeholders on this particular effort. And we also, through people don't realize, but the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services has also been very involved in this effort, and they are explicitly written into the law because we know that unfortunately so much of the hate we have seen targeting our communities was born out of misinformation and disinformation that has associated Asian Americans with this virus and unfortunately blamed us for the cause of the pandemic. And we are still seeing a lot of that misinformation out there in communities. I mean, it pains me that, nearly on a daily basis, we are hearing of cases of anti-Asian hate, oftentimes unprovoked, oftentimes targeting our most vulnerable communities, our elderly, our women, and just really, completely unprovoked attacks, where we see just really heinous, crimes being committed against our communities, and that is not okay. So this is something, again, President Biden and Vice President Harris are very deeply committed to ensuring that as we recover from the pandemic, that we are also looking at how are we doing this in an equitable way and ensuring that all communities are included in this effort. And one really big priority for our White House initiative is to ensure that we are addressing anti-Asian bias and hate and promoting greater inclusion and belonging of our communities, not just as a reactive, effect to the hate crimes, but also thinking about how do we actually get to the root cause of rooting out hate in our, impacting Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. And a lot of that, is going to require education. People, I think, still unfortunately see our communities as perpetual foreigners, regardless of how many generations we can claim living in this country. For someone like myself, I am both of Native Hawaiians, I'm indigenous, the Native Hawaiian people in Hawaii, but also I'm Asian American, and my mother is an immigrant from Japan. And I think, again, people still see so many people who look like us as foreigners to this country, as if we don't belong, despite our rich histories, our contributions, and all the work that we have done. And I think that's especially, for us, it's so important that we be able to share our stories and uplift our contributions. And that's something that, again, our White House initiative is very focused on. Just I'm gonna flag 2 other things. The anti-Asian, bias and hate is of course top of mind, but as we recover from the pandemic or continue our recovery efforts, it's really important that we're also addressing a number of disparities that have been really laid bare over the past, nearly 2.5 years. And so that is something that, again, this administration is really laser focused on, making sure that as we talk about equity, we really are prioritizing things like data disaggregation for the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community, prioritizing language access for our communities, and the Congresswoman has done a really phenomenal job. I just want you to know you have a strong champion in Congress who is such a phenomenal leader fighting for diverse communities, but especially for the Asian American community here in Lowell. So we are really grateful to have leaders all across the nation who've really fought to just ensure we have more visibility And now knowing that we have a president and a vice president who truly see us and hear us and want to ensure that the federal government is accessible to all Americans, including our Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander communities, I think it's, again, so tremendous to see this focus on our community in ways we have never seen before in the past. And so I'm just really, again, honored and grateful for the chance to be here with all of you. I'm looking forward to being able to hear from many of you about the challenges and concerns you'd like to raise, but also how we can work together moving forward. There's a lot of work to do, but again, I'm very hopeful with the leadership that we have both in Congress and the administration and with all of you here today that we can build a brighter future for generations to come. So thank you.
My name is Audrey Chia. I service low community for many years through radio access, through a television program run out from LTC. And I am with my producer, sent me here to represent her today. Her name is WHIAANHPI, and she produced Voice of Khmer America television show for Channel 95 and Channel 8. So we do both in English and Khmer. And we have the privilege to service our community in both language, for those who speak English and for those who speak Khmer. And I want to share with you that every concern that you had identified on, the crime against Asians due to the misunderstanding of COVID-19, I had at our community what it is about, and like you said, we brought up the things that our AAPI community had contributed into our society locally and nationally and historically. And we have to own it because we contribute a lot, right? And we have to make it known. And like you said, because we are being seen as a model minority, we are being forgotten that we also have challenges and needs. And we are being left behind with our mental health need, with our healthcare need, with our language access need. You mentioned it. We have all of those challenges.
Say a word of solidarity and just commitment to my new appointment as the WHIAANHPI Region 1 lead. And so what that means is we want to make sure there's a local representative that represents the initiative. And so I'm born and raised in Boston, and I grew up in Chinatown. And so much like all of you here in the Cambodian community in Cambodia town, we're very passionate and understand that it's a struggle. And so much like Audrey right here just passionately spoke, I feel the same vibes in my community in Chinatown where I come from. So I just want to say that there's a lot of respect and there's a lot of solidarity that I would like to continue building a relationship with all of you and just do all that I can to make sure there's someone local to support the work that Krystal is doing on Capitol Hill. Thank you.
A couple of things that I would like to bring to your attention. One is seniors. I don't think that our local community senior centers are prepared well enough for AAPI communities. I think in another 20 years I'll be there. And I would love to hear some Bollywood music, but I don't know if our senior centers are prepared for that. We have a fantastic senior center in the town I live in, Hopkinton. That's where the Boston Marathon starts. I used to serve as a greeter there, and I love the group of people I'm with. But like I said, I don't know if we are prepared for the larger senior community. We saw a lot of atrocities happen to our seniors in the past few years. They were resilient, they fought back. We have to stand next to them.
The need for data disaggregation in terms of for AAPI, Native American Pacific Islanders, as well as Hawaiian brothers and sisters. I think data disaggregation is very critical and important in terms of, even though our communities faces similar barriers and access, but I think in order to effectively address those issues, we do need data disaggregation so that we can provide appropriate support for our communities. And I just want to thank Congresswoman Chauhan for helping to advocate to get additional funding for the WHIAANHPI grant, doubled from $5 million to $10 million. And
one of the things that I've actually been thinking a lot about is not so specifically for Asian, but just education around how do you talk about race issues, and how do you utilize, certain instances as an opportunity, and do we all have those tools to be able to talk about it? So I've actually been talking to one of our volunteers quite a bit recently because she went to organizing training and she got kicked out of the program. And it was because this is a white woman who is who's been amazingly involved with the community, but she had said things that triggered people of color that were in the training. And instead of using that as a teachable moment, they just kicked her out because some people felt uncomfortable. And with all the things going on in this country, and you watch Fox News and the way they talk about the race and critical race theories and all of that, and then you watch CNN and like the things they talk about, and how do we really start learning how to talk about these things in a setting that we're not yelling and screaming at each other, calling each other names, but so we, I think, need to learn how to educate ourselves to give us those tools to talk about. So one of the things that this woman actually said, I guess at the event, was that she's a proud white woman. And the other thing that she talked about is she, as a white woman, has experienced reverse racism. And that has triggered a lot of people. And we actually had a lot of discussion, with one of our staff with her about why that wasn't appropriate for her to say, and it was learning for both of the parties. But that just really made me think, like, how do we have conversations around race issues to get rid of the discriminations and the racism that we face. So that's something that I've actually been thinking a lot about. But the other piece that I just want to say is it's amazing to see we have so many elected officials that are Asian descent or even BIPOC, but I don't think it's enough. And how do we also prepare next generation of leaders? And I look around the room, and I'm actually really sad to say I pretty much know everyone that's in this room. Right? So where are the other upcoming leaders of like Asian descent, like AAPI, leaders, and how do we also bring them on to take on after retiring? So who's next? After you, who's next? Who's taking your place? And those of us that are here that are a little bit older, like, I don't want to be doing this forever, and I want to have that's our responsibility. But how do we do it in a way that they also understand, in some ways, responsibility as a BIPOC leader, and how do we do advocacy work to dismantle racism and all of these issues that we're talking about here. So thank you.
I volunteer for the Cambodian American Little League Arts Association, as well as freelance write for the Lowell Sun. And prior to the work that I do now, I was with Elder Services of the Merrimack Valley, which is Age Span, providing in-home care services for older adults, predominantly the Cambodian American community here in Lowell, my Cambodian elders. And I've also worked with young people through Girls Inc. and through the GRIP project in a residential home that was designed to take in young folks that were aging out of the foster care system or coming out of youth detention centers and assimilating them back into the community, and hoping that we can provide them with the tools necessary so that they can gain their independence and be functioning and productive adults and community members. So there's a broad range of folks that I've worked with in different age groups. And in particular, I think one of the biggest things about being able to have those conversations about race and around people's experiences is be able to find a medium or a platform that is super neutral. And one of those things that I found was the arts. And so in working with the Cambodian American Literary Arts Association and dealing with artists from different mediums, from visual arts to performance arts, to music, to writing and literature, we found that we've been able to share experiences and people are actively seeking out this material. So you don't really have to push it on people. You're like, you have this history, you have this story, and you're putting it out there for the community to access. So if folks really wanted to learn about the Cambodian American experience, the Vietnamese American experience, the Lao American experience, they can access those stories through multiple channels, whether online or actually going into one of the bookstores, our local bookstores here that we've been partnering with Lala Books and the Lowell Book Company to access that material. And that way, in a sense, it doesn't put the onus on the folks who have these experiences to educate others. Yeah. It's more of being vulnerable and being able to put yourself out there, which I was very hesitant to do for a very long time, because our experience are personal to us, and it can be very difficult, and it could be a part of it. It's reliving the trauma again to share these stories, and especially now with the pandemic, that trauma has been exacerbated, and we all know that anybody that has a history of trauma, any new introduction to a new trauma can trigger them to revisit all the traumas that they have experienced in their lifetime. So I understand, like with my parents specifically, and I can only speak to their experience, that during the pandemic, there was this real fear of not having. And so there is hoarding, there is, them telling me that I shouldn't go anywhere. We had a candlelight vigil out over at Clemente Park for the victims of the spa shooting. And I had gone to speak there, and my father's like, why are you there? He said, they're out there like killing Asian women, and you're like standing out in public, like making yourself a target. Like, he really doesn't want me to be involved because he fears for the people that I love. And I feel that I'm doing it because I do fear for the people I love, and I want to be out there advocating and utilizing my voice. I feel that because I am one of those folks that are willing to share and willing to advocate, that I have a duty and a responsibility to utilize that ability to help my community. So I really do want to make sure that young people are coming into the fold, and we are organizing the future leaders of this community. A lot of it has to do with breaking those cycles of intergenerational trauma and having our young people really understand where they come from and bridging that intergenerational gap, right? Because we're talking about first generation immigrants and like third generation born here grandchildren who don't understand one another and don't fully connect with one another. So in those sharing of stories and experiences, the young people can come to understand the adults a lot better, and the adults can come to understand the young people a little better. As an adult now, my relationship with my parents is much better because I've been able to hang on to the language through the work I've done in the community, and because of my parents' inability to speak English, I've always been their interpreter, if you will. And when I was younger, I didn't really understand the trauma that they went through. I was rebellious, I was a high school dropout, I became a teen parent. Like, there was a lot of history and not understanding why these things were happening and feeling like, I'm smarter than this, why am I making these poor choices, what's going on, not understanding mental health, not understanding what my parents went through, and coming to that realization as an adult and really wanting to reach out to the community to help everybody else understand that collective experience that we have. And the fact that each of our experiences, even though it's collective, is unique because of the perspectives that we bring to it, and that can be utilized to help the rest of our community. So I would, encourage folks to really share their story and share it with your young people, because it's important for them to understand what you have experienced so that they can learn from it and they can utilize it to help themselves work through some of the struggles that they're experiencing now.
At the same time, I feel that our community have not support enough. Here in Lowell, I'm going to speak to the council enough until a resource teaching other people of like what is disability in our community. You know what disability is? It's built very strong, especially with the Asian. It's like very stigmatized that you are nobody, you are bad karma, you are not supposed to be. You're just evil in my community, in my family. They put it behind, right? So here in America, I think is that please do encourage our community to talk about disability. Now, I know you're talking about elder, right? Well, of course we're going to be there, but the people with disability, they have really need someone to support that. I was wonderful, happy. Just help our family, help their kid how to talk about disability. So that's where my overall picture, I think.
So, heartening to hear just the work that you are doing deep in communities here in Lowell and really across the state too. I mean, just being able to hear about all of the issues that were raised today. And one thing I'm realizing too is as we're talking about, I wanted to also flag, I didn't mention this earlier, but we don't just have a White House initiative for the Asian American, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community. We have one for the Hispanic community, for the Black community, Native American. So to the Congresswoman's point, this administration and this president has really prioritized equity unlike anything we've ever seen before, making sure that all communities, including our disabled communities, including communities that have oftentimes been at the margins and not always had a seat or a voice at the table, that they are actually being brought into government, because it is so important that as we recover from COVID, as we really address some of these longstanding inequities that have been laid bare over the past 2 years, that we are doing so in a new way, that we're making sure that communities that have not always had a seat at the table or a voice actually are included in this discussions moving forward. And I think when we've looked at seeing the representation here in terms of elected officials, it's very, I had no idea, I will say this is my own ignorance, but coming to Boston yesterday, I learned that in the state legislature, you have 9 AA and HPI representatives, which is tremendous to think about that in this state. And also to see the representation at the state and local level, it really shows how resilient our communities have been, and especially for our Cambodian, our Vietnamese and Laotian communities who have faced war and genocide and have, been able to really emerge just so strong, and to see your, resilience here, the work that you are doing, and also the path that you are creating for future generations is really inspiring. And so I want you to know again that you have really strong partners at the federal level. We have Norman, who was mentioned. He is here as our region lead for the White House initiative for Region 1, which includes Massachusetts. And so there are, we really want this to be the first of many ongoing conversations. We want you to know that you have allies and partners in the White House, throughout the federal government, in Congress, who are really fighting to make sure that we are building a more inclusive America for all. And I think whether it's ongoing American Rescue Plan Act, resources, there's just a lot being poured out into the country. But again, so many times we're hearing that our communities are either not finding out about these resources or the last to know. And at that point, it's really not helpful if we're hearing about things months after the fact. So we're going to really rely on all of you to be, again, our trusted leaders and to be our bridge to make sure that our local communities are not falling behind, and that we actually have an opportunity, like you said, to really promote equity, justice, and opportunity for all Americans, including our AA and NHPI community. So thank you again for just all of the work you're doing. Really looking forward to our continued work together.